quorum be suspended.
Without objection.
I come to the floor to ask unanimous consent on two pieces of legislation. The first one is a bipartisan amendment that I have with Senator Klobuchar. It's been cleared on both sides of the aisle. It does not cost anything. It is non-controversial, and I'm not aware of any opposition or controversy about it. I filed this amendment as soon as we were on the bill and have been asking for a vote ever since. I'm happy to accept a voice vote. I do not understand why that is not possible. This amendment is entitled Assisting Broadband Connectivity Act that Senator Klobuchar and I introduced last month. This amendment will make changes to the rural broadband program at USDA so that areas aren't automatically ineligible for federal funding because the project previously received state funding. In other words, if a project got state money, now they can't qualify for federal money. This change will ease the administrative burden for those applying to provide broadband in rural America. However, this won't change the requirements for rural utilities service when they administer these programs, such as overbill and coordination with other broadband entities. This bill also provides more flexibility with funding and resources that allow states to use funds received from the federal government, such as COVID state funding, to be used for matching funds provision that is required for most applications. This update will help rural America move forward by providing more coordination and funding availability for broadband projects. This is not unusual for the rural utility service. They currently allow CDBG and state revolving loan funds for water and wastewater to be used for matching purposes. This amendment will help our states and providers connect all the pieces from both the state and federal level to help get some of these expensive and urgent rural broadband projects completed. This amendment has been cleared by the Senate Agriculture Committee. There is no reason it should not get a vote. I'm not aware of any opposition, and I have some letters of support I want to put in the record. I ask you see.
Without objection.
Okay. The second amendment is also, the second bill is also a bipartisan bill by Grassley and Leahy. My amendment provides anti-fraud provisions to the infrastructure package. This amendment combines two of my bills, the False Claims Amendment Act and the Administrative False Claims Act, both of which are bipartisan and have garnered support from both the good government and Inspector General communities. By the way, this amendment is scored by CBO to bring in more than $100 million, and it seems to me that's a pretty significant amount of money, particularly when the infrastructure bill was scored by CBO to add $256 billion to the debt. This amendment provides long-needed improvements to combat fraud perpetrated against the federal government. I'd like to thank my bipartisan group of friends that has supported this bill and this amendment with their co-sponsorship. Now, just to make clear, the only business interests that have anything to worry about, and I'm emphasizing this because since this amendment was offered, you'd be surprised all the business interests that have come out in opposition to this provision. So the only thing these business interests have to have anything to worry about with this anti-fraud amendment are the same ones who are already found in a court of law to have defrauded the taxpayers. Since I got the False Claims Act passed in 1986, It has brought in more than $65 billion of fraudulent taken tax dollars. At this time, I'd like to have letters of support to put in the record as well.
Without objection.
So now, Madam President, I ask unanimous consent that the following amendments be called up to the substitute and reported by number. Grassley 2435, that's Grassley Leahy, Grassley 2500, Grassley Klobuchar. So I want to emphasize, both of these are bipartisan pieces of legislation.
Is there objection? Senator from Alabama.
Reserving the right to object. I'd ask now that the senator modify his request to include my amendment, number 2535, and I'll speak to that briefly. The underlying bill includes billions of dollars for all manner of infrastructure investments in the U.S. However, it fails to address critical infrastructure needs to support our national defense. This amendment that I'm bringing forth would rectify that. I believe that we cannot, in America, continue to spend hand over fist on domestic priorities, a lot of them are important, without investing dime one in our national defense infrastructure. This would rectify that, and I would ask that to include my amendment in this.
Is there an objection to the modification? Senator from Iowa is recognized.
Reserving the right to object, I would ask that the request be further modified to include my amendment number 2639. And my amendment is very simple. It requires a public price tag to be put on projects funded with taxpayer dollars by the Department of Energy and the Department of Transportation. It allows taxpayers to see exactly how their dollars are being spent, whether it's on an airport, a bridge, or any other project. Congress has renewed the provision, referred to as the Stevens Amendment, annually for more than 30 years for some federal agencies, including the Departments of Health and Human Services, Education, and Labor. It was most recently approved by Congress and signed into law as part of both the Consolidated Appropriations Act of 2021 and the National Defense Authorization Act of 2021. The infrastructure bill we are now considering will finance many projects across the country. My amendment would provide some much-needed transparency for taxpayers by showing what projects are being funded with their tax dollars and the actual costs associated with them. In practice, my amendment requires nothing more than a single sentence disclosing the dollar amount paid by taxpayers and what that amount represents of the overall percentage of the project's budget. The only reason to oppose this common sense transparency is if there's something to hide. I urge the consideration of my amendment and ask that my colleagues vote yes. And again, I ask that the request be further modified to include my amendment, Ernst number 2639.
Does the senator so modify his request?
I will accept that modification, but I want to add, in fact, I think every senator ought to get a vote. We have wasted all day Thursday, Saturday, and now through Sunday. That's enough time to vote on a multitude of amendments, and we just sat around those 3 days accomplishing nothing.
Is there an objection to the request as modified?
Madam President,
Senator from Arizona is recognized.
reserving the right to object. I first would like to associate myself with the comments just uttered by the senior senator from Iowa. I think many of us are frustrated that we have been sitting around together for quite some time without moving forward. But as I remarked in earlier comments today, the United States Senate is a body that requires the unanimous consent of every single senator. And each senator has the right to withhold his objection or consent to any process moving forward. Over the last day and a half, we have seen a lack of willingness to collaborate, to come together to find unanimous consent, to move forward on both the consideration of a number of amendments, including those offered today, and a time agreement. It's not because there weren't many people who were willing to do so. In fact, most of the members of this body were interested in finding such an agreement. But it is the right of each and every senator and the privilege of each and every senator to withhold that consent if he so chooses. And that is the situation we find ourselves in today. So, Madam President and others, I would recommend that just in 1 hour, we will see this post-cloture time expire, and we will move forward under regular order to finish consideration of this broad bipartisan piece of legislation. And I do want to take a moment to commend my colleagues on both sides of the aisle, the 22 Democrats and Republicans who've worked together over the last several months with their colleagues on both sides of the aisle to consider a historic 22 amendments to this legislation to ensure that a broad and bipartisan discussion was held, and I look forward to a swift and positive resolution by passing this legislation. And with that, Madam President, I object.
Objection is heard.
It's done now.
Okay.
Sorry about that.
Madam President.
Senator from Mississippi is recognized.
Madam President, I rise this afternoon to announce my support for this